what is ABA, what is applied behavior analysis, and what it isn't. So what it is, I'm going to, just as an overview, we're going to have a look at the science and the training, and that includes obviously our Masters in ABA, and there's a web page for that. And then we'll have a look at what it isn't. We'll have a look at the misconceptions, the misdemeanors, and the outright lies that sadly are, like in any science, misconceptions happen. So what it is, first of all, the definition, the generally accepted definition, is applied behavior analysis is a science in which the principles of the analysis of behavior, this is really important, are used to improve socially significant behavior, and the independent variables responsible for behavior change are systematically identified and changed if need be. So anything that isn't using the principles of the analysis of behavior to improve socially significant behavior is not behavior, is not an ABA. And anything that doesn't have a look at the independent variables responsible for the behavior change and systematically identifies them isn't ABA either. So it's really important. From my perspective, the socially significant behavior is probably one of the key phrases here. And we'll come back to that. So the key components are, the focus is on meaningful improvement of socially significant behaviours. And the way I've put it is the right of each person to live their best lives. It's really important to behaviour analysts to bring out the best in people. There's actually books published with that title, and in the organisational management, and to help people to fulfil their full potential. And when we work with different people, that's obviously individually different, but it's the full potential that we're helping to bring out. That's our aim. We are guided by attitudes and methods of the scientific inquiry, and to ensure social validity, acceptability, and significance of three things: goals, procedures, and outcomes. Okay, so we measure social validity as part of our work. At least we should. Sometimes we miss out on that, but that's one really important thing. The interventions and processes are systematic and replicable. Again, really important that for our students that they write up procedures that they're replicable, that people are to replicate a study is a really valuable thing to do. Based on the scientific principles of behaviour that have been established over the last 100-odd years and are continuing to be established, not established actually, that's the wrong word, it should be discovered. Nobody's making these up. These are discovered like any other scientific principles are discovered of the environment, of nature. Like Darwin didn't make it up. He discovered evolution and so forth. So we analyze the factors responsible for the improvement, and we try and find out what are the factors that we need to change to have improvement in the socially significant behaviour, and to ensure the maintenance and generalisation of behaviour change. This is where I used to be in the School of Social Work way back, and that was one thing we didn't do in the School of Social Work as much as the maintenance and generalisation. This is one of the things that really is very important for behaviour analysts. We don't just achieve behaviour change, but that we also make sure that that change is maintained over long periods of time, and that change generalises not only to other situations, but also to other people, to other behaviours possibly even. So what it is, we're obviously very keen to make sure that the human rights are adhered to, and like I don't need to explain that. I think that's other people have in the school have more expertise on this, but this is very much close to our heart, the UN Convention of the Rights for the Child, because we're going to look at the areas where applied behaviour analysis is being used, but it's often used with children, so that's a really important one for us. And of course, the Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, because again, a lot of our work is in that area. But the reality is really, and maybe you've seen recently that a very recent report, I think it came out yesterday, from the Auditor General, calls for an urgent review of special educational needs in Northern Ireland, because the things have gotten really, really bad there. But I've got the web links there. That's not our topic for today, but that's really the reality in which behaviour analysts are working in Northern Ireland, and educators and teachers as well, of course. So the ethics that we are talking about, we want to see a better world starts with seeing behaviour through science. Not everybody agrees with that, but that's the approach that behaviour analysts take, that behaviour can actually be scientifically studied. And one of the things, I used to have that underneath my email. If you keep doing what you're doing, you keep getting what you're getting. So if you're not happy with what you're getting in terms of not getting materially, but in terms of behavioral outcomes, if you're not happy with the behavioral outcome that you're achieving with whatever you're doing, you need to change what you're doing. Because only by changing what you're doing can you change the behavior of the people that you're doing it to. Another one that I quite like is if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. I'm going to try and see if I can, no, I can't get that link. The areas of application, I'm going to just quickly see if I can get this, this page up here. Can you see that? Yeah? Everybody see that? This is the areas of, these are the areas of application for behavior analysis. So a whole range: behavioral medicine, addiction, change, staff training, self-management, precision teaching, a whole pharmacology, criterion-based, a whole range of different areas. A lot of people think behavior analysis is an intervention for autism, and it clearly isn't. It's an area that where it's a science that can be applied to a whole range of different areas. So the evidence when it comes to autism, I mean, one of the big areas that we do use a lot of applied behavior analysis is autism. So I'm not going to stop I'm going to run through some of these slides here. So the evidence for autism is simply overwhelming. Each of these here is a published paper over the last 50 years. These are the papers that have been published with evidence that the methods that we are using, the interventions that are based on the science, are helping children with autism achieve their full potential to the best of their ability. There is a whole range. This is papers from the 70s, 80s, 90s. These are just all these slides. You can slow them up when you're watching the video. You can slow them up so you've got all of these publications. And I think that only goes to about 2010. There's obviously another 10 years, but I don't have the slides for that. There is an overwhelming amount of research that these methods and the methods that are based on this science help children with autism. And that's probably why people think it is for kids with autism. It isn't. It just is very, very effective, and kids with autism have benefited from a lot of it. So when we're talking about the training for behavior analysts, at the moment, the training is, well, it's not regulated. The training is, in a sense, regulated by the Behavior Analyst Certification Board. There's the web page. And here you have each of these red flags represents a college that offers a verified course sequence in training. So you can see there's quite a lot. There's still some states in America that don't have a lot of training, but it's generally speaking, it's quite prevalent in America. But in Europe, the map looks very empty. And as you can see in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, we have 2 courses. We have ours in Queen's, and Ulster has one as well. And there's a couple of other ones in Ireland, and there's none in England. There's actually one in Kent now. It just started last year or the year before. There was 2 or 3 in Wales. There's none in Scotland. And in other countries around Europe, they're lucky to have one course. So it shows you the course that we are offering at Queen's is actually, that's why we're so successful. That's why we get so many students, because we are the only online course in the English language in Europe. Obviously, the Americans do it in the English language as well, but in Europe, we are the only online course. A Spanish course is offered in Madrid, is offered online as well, but it's in Spanish. So we are getting all these European students who want to study behavior analysis in Europe online in the English language. So that's why we get so many have such a good recruitment on the course. But obviously we get I've only got Europe here for you. If you look into Asia, it's even less. I mean, there are very, very, very few courses. So what do these people get when they come to our training? They get 315 hours of training in those 6 modules that we offer, which is an awful lot more, because usually our 20 CATS points have about 20 classroom hours, and our 6 ABA modules have 315 classroom hours. And then, of course, the nominal effort hours are the same as anybody else. So they can study all of these topics. I'm not going to go through them, because you would need to come to the masters. Be welcome, come to our masters, or audit the modules or whatever. But you can see there's an awful lot of emphasis on philosophical underpinning concepts, principles, measurement, data display, all of those things, behavioral assessment, change procedures, and personal supervision and management. You can do it at master's level or doctoral level. We're offering doctoral level training as well. So we've got quite a number of doctoral students, and it's a very successful. Now these doctoral students are just doing an ordinary PhD, but we call it an ABA focused PhD, because we want students that have already got a master's in ABA to come on to do PhDs with us. It makes our life so much easier if they already know what ABA is and have studied it at master's level. Most of our PhD students already are board certified behaviour analysts by now. But in order to become a board certified behaviour analyst, you have to do that master's degree. You have to do 200 hours of practice under supervision. That's a bit more than a year, so that compares to the social workers with a year in assessed year in practice. They don't have to do it in a year, but it's the same equivalent. And then they have to sit a BCBA exam. And there's a couple of changes, but I'm not going to go into detail about what is actually changing over the next few years. And I can give another talk in 3 or 4 years' time to tell you about the changes. But that's where we're at the moment. Our masters looks like this. I'm sure you've seen the flyers. You can have a look at the web page. And for that masters, we have developed a range of resources because it's been going online now for the last 2009, the first online module came along. So 10 years anyway, a good 10 years we've had the online modules for the masters. It wasn't the masters then, it was modules offered through the autism masters, and eventually grew so much, the interest was so great that we started the ABA masters. So here you can see an online, have a scurry around that webpage. We've just finished it this summer, so we're quite pleased. Another online resource that we've developed over many more years with European funding is called Simple Steps, and there you have the web page for that. So feel free to have a look at that if you're interested. And now that Simple Steps was developed from 2008 to 2010 when we had the boxes, and you can see that our colleague Nicola was already involved in that at the time, but with colleagues from Northern Ireland, Germany, Spain, and Norway. And at the time, we were able to give each of those countries 1,000 free copies of those boxes, which was great because this is not about being commercial. This is about disseminating the science. And then a year later, we got another big European grant, and this time we had partners from Italy, Netherlands, Iceland, and Sweden, and we were able to give 500 free online licenses. By this stage, the package was online. We were able to give online licenses free to those countries in their languages. So we have this resource that is actually available. The videos, the animations, the whole thing is available in 10 European languages. And not surprisingly, we're quite proud of this. We got an award for doing this Simple Steps, so that's quite nice. So what is the problem? So I've given you 15 minutes on here. I've given you a very, very quick run through as to what ABA is and where it's coming from and the kinds of things that we've been up to in the school. So what is the problem? The problem is that there's a lot of people completely don't get it. They have not studied it. They don't know what ABA is, and yet they talk about it. That is the big problem. And they talk about it, and by doing that, they disseminate myths, misconceptions, and sometimes outright lies. And of course, when somebody tells an outright lie about something, and you just say, well, that's actually not true, you're always on the defensive. So we've tried not to go on the defensive too much, but sometimes you kind of have to. And sometimes it's just the ethical duty of a behavior analyst to correct misconceptions. But I'm really also, because I'm a clinical psychologist by my original training, as a clinical psychologist, I'm bound by the ethics code of the BPS to not talk about things outside my area of expertise. So I should only be talking about things, and I should only be doing things that are lying within my area of competence and expertise. And when somebody talks about ABA who has not studied it, then they're doing exactly that. They're talking outside their area of expertise, and it's their ethical duty not to do that. So we come across that quite a lot, and it shouldn't happen, but it does. And then we suppose we have to argue back. So what we did one time earlier this year, we published an online paper, it was published in the Barrister because a lot of parents want ABA-based intervention for their kids with autism, and when they don't get it, then they have to take the trust to the board, to the tribunal, and try and fight to get the funding for it. We'll talk about the funding in a minute. So what we were approached by an educational psychologist who is often in the courts, and she was asking us just for some reprints for some papers saying that, you know, it seemed to be quite useful stuff and she could use it and stuff. So we started a conversation with her, and she was just telling us what is said in the courtrooms, and we couldn't believe it. I mean, we had heard it before, and we've written loads. I've written loads on this kind of topic, but this was just. It was very interesting to work with her to see what are the misconceptions, what are people actually saying about ABA, people who haven't studied it and who don't know what it is, but what are they saying. So I'm going to run through a couple of the things that they say, and you may or may not have heard them. You may not have come across these arguments, but if you want to have a better look at it, you can go to the Barrister magazine, and if you do a search under my name, you'll find, and there's a short URL here at the bottom as well. Read that whole article. So the next few slides are based on that article. So one thing that they are saying in the courts are ABA is one of many intervention approaches or models for children with autism. So ABA is just a therapy for autism. Well, from what I've said so far, I think it's already apparent that that is just not the case. That ABA is not a model any more than physics or chemistry are models. They're sciences. ABA is an applied science. But what has happened is people have taken shortcuts and adopted manualized models instead of acquiring the full skill in the science. Instead of studying for a full master's, they're just picking one particular procedure. It's like somebody not studying medicine, but learning about heart surgery, and then sort of saying, I can do heart surgery. I've got a manual here how to do heart surgery, but I've never studied medicine. You would never allow that, okay? But it seems to be happening. It encourages, those manualized models encourage the focus on specific procedures instead of on how to analyze the behavior and the outcomes of applying principles. So what I've said so far is really showing you that behavior analysis, applied behavior analysis is science that applies to all socially important human behaviors, not just autism. Okay. Then what people say is ABA uses physical punishment and aversives, okay? And I don't get this at all, because obviously we don't, because it's illegal anyway, and you wouldn't. Why would you? Because we have far, far better methods. I've written about this nearly 30 years ago. I've written papers on why smacking kids is not necessary at all. That doesn't mean to say that you're letting kids away with blue murder. They still have to learn certain things and whatever, but they don't have to learn it through aversives and punishment. And why is ABA singled out for this? Because physical punishment of children was widespread in the 60s. And of course, it doesn't make it right now, but in the UK, imagine physical punishment was only outlawed in schools in 1986. That's not that long ago, where people were still allowed to be caned, and maybe some of you remember that. And physical punishment is still not outlawed in the family. And as a German, I find that really, really strange that you're still allowed to smack your kids in families in the UK, whereas it's banned in most European countries. And also in those days, there were, you know, the autism interventions that were prominent in those days also used smacks in the past. Okay, so it's not that made it right, but why are they not criticized for it? Why is ABA criticized for it? And it obviously aversives play no part in contemporary ABA programs at all. It's all about positive reinforcement and working positively with the collaboration of the child. Then there's a new one. ABA causes post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is based on one piece of research by Kupferstein that was published in 2 papers. She had caregivers of children with autism and adults with autism, and in an online survey, the adults with autism identified it as autistic themselves. They didn't have to prove that they had a diagnosis. That was just, do you have autism? And if they clicked yes, then that was accepted. So no confirmed diagnosis. And the average age at the time when they got diagnosed was over 25. So adults that took part. And the questions about the post-traumatic stress were about symptoms, not an independently verified confirmation of PTSD. So they were just asked certain symptoms, do you have these? And on top of that, when they were asked about ABA-based intervention, they were not asked to define what that meant, and apart from the fact to say that they were early. And then she said, quote, autistic people have a sensitivity to the way to the way any situation is initially appraised. And a benign situation which is perceived as harmful or threatening to the individual can become a potentially traumatic event, which could trigger post-traumatic stress symptoms due to the underlying vulnerability. So she's saying that, and she says she's on the spectrum herself. So clearly then, when even if the adults in her online survey experienced helpful and benign interventions, the vulnerability that she's identified and the sensitivity and sensory overselectivity that is part of autism, in her words, that could have led to the post-traumatic stress symptoms. So it wasn't the intervention at all, it was the interpretation of a benign intervention that might have led to it. She in those papers, and this is just taking apart some of the points because it makes me really. I've done quite a bit of work in trauma and post-traumatic stress in my PhD way back then on the troubles. So it's sort of an area that is very close to my heart. So whenever she published the paper, she only used percentages of respondents. So I did a quick calculation. So the non-completion rate of her survey was 50%. So the people did start but didn't finish. So 50% for the adults with autism and 61% for the caregivers. So that when you take those people out that didn't complete the survey, then that leaves you down to about 120 and 130 people in each of those categories. She then said 11% of the adults reported an experience with ABA. So 11 out of 120. That's about 12. To be good generous, that's about 12, 13 adults. And of these 12 or 13 adults, 62% reported to have symptoms. So that's 7. So we have now got 7 adults with a self-diagnosis of autism who reported to have had some ABA, and there's another issue we come to in a minute, who ABA-based intervention, who also report some post-traumatic stress symptoms. So we are way past all people with autism who get ABA have post-traumatic stress syndrome. So there are some other points to consider. The fact that these ABA-based interventions are generally early interventions, but the respondents were self-diagnosed or diagnosed with autism when they were over 25, I say here unlikely, but they didn't have early interventions if they didn't have a diagnosis. That's just not how it works. For anybody to give you good quality interventions in any kind of intervention in autism, you have to have a diagnosis as a child. Otherwise, you don't get early intervention. So there also was no mention of any additional traumatic life events, and anybody who studied traumatic life events knows that obviously you need to take account of other events that can happen during adulthood, and that have been linked to post-traumatic stress syndromes like bereavement, abuse, accidents, near-death experience, and so forth. There was no assessment whether these people had any of these. And then she also stated that mothers who are exposed to childhood trauma, including physical and emotional sexual abuse, are nearly twice as likely to give birth to a child with autism. Now, I can't verify those data, but she's stating those, and she references that. And so clearly, childhood trauma may be caused by parental trauma. We know that from transgenerational transmission of parental trauma, and I've done some work on that as well with the troubles-related stuff with Monse Fargas, who is a colleague in the school, which I'm really pleased about. She was my research assistant at the time, years and years ago, and we did, and for her PhD as well, we did some transgenerational transmission of trauma. So I know a little bit about that. So many other severe methodological problems have also been identified by some other people who said Kupferstein's results should be viewed with extreme caution due to several methodological and conceptual flaws, including, but not limited to, leading questions used within a non-validated survey, failure to confirm diagnosis, and incomplete description of the intervention. And one other thing that I was sort of thinking, she asked the same question of the parents of the kids with autism as she did for the adults. So if then somebody asked you, do you experience these symptoms? An adult with autism answering that question will answer about themselves. But if you ask a parent that, will they answer about themselves or about their child? I'm not sure that she just differentiated between those two. So the reality really is that there's much evidence that people with confirmed diagnosis of PTSD seek and are supported by effective evidence-based behavior analytic procedures such as behavior activation, graded exposure, and cognitive behavior therapy. So that's that argument. It's amazing how that still persists. And then somebody said autism, ABA causes suicide. So I don't know exactly where that came from, but that's what the educational psychologist said. That's actually been said in the courts. So people with autism tend to die much younger than other people. There's research to show that, and it's really terrible that that should be the case. But the reasons for premature death are mainly co-occurrent health conditions, mainly epilepsy, sometimes mental health issues, and also drowning where the children are eloping. There's no evidence whatsoever of any relationship between premature death and suicide and ABA-based intervention. On the contrary, ABA-based programs focus on prevention of elopement, and I've got a PhD student who was working on water safety, just recently finished on teaching these kids water safety and developing ABA-based programs around that, and it's been hugely successful. Teaching social and life skills and communication skills, and all of that has been identified as improving the quality of life and therefore have a potential to prevent suicide and premature death. And there's more on that on the website. Here's a nice old one. ABA uses conversion therapy. Well, conversion therapy, you might know, refers to the abusive pseudo-scientific, medical, spiritual, and psychological practice of trying to change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity that were used in the 60s. The treatment at the time was driven by psychoanalytic theory, although we must admit that some practices included behavioral methods. So there was some behavioral methods were being used in the 60s to do that. But since then, conversion therapy has been debunked and considered torture, but it's still legal in some states in the US. And of course, nowadays, people with different sexual orientations are accepted. Well, I was going to say are accepted. There's obviously a long way to go before they're fully accepted, but the general trend is in that direction. There's nobody should be, well, people should not be trying to change that. Modern day behavior analysts and ABA practitioners are not involved in any of this kind of conversion therapy. Then people are saying ABA creates robotic behavior and that new skills are only masking autistic behaviors. Well, in ABA programs, oftentimes, because these kids need a lot of skills, or especially when it's used for autism, but because it's all skills-based and behavior-based, in ABA programs, complex behaviors are often broken down into small learn units. We call them learn units. This is necessary when a child does not have the prerequisite skills for complex tasks or is in an early stage of phase of learning a new skill. But that's the same for all of us. Anybody learning a new skill seems a little bit robotic. If you ever remember what it was like to learn the piano and how that staccato of one finger piano sounds, it's very robotic. It's just what happens when you learn a new language. How robotic does that sound when you first utter your first sentences in the new language and go in that country and in that shop? That doesn't sound fluent. Sorry. So in ABA, the learning is not complete until the student is able to carry out the new skill with fluency and skills are generalized and maintained. Behavioral fluency is an area that we're we teach on the masters quite a lot about behavioral fluency. It relates to that you can do the behavior accurately, so you can actually do the behavior, but you can also do it at the required speed, because speed is actually an interesting phenomenon when it comes to behavior, because when you do a behavior really, really slowly, there's a lovely exercise that one of the behavior analysts does, and I've done it before as well, when they're asking people to write your first name and take 1 whole minute to write it. You should try that someday. It's really interesting. Take a whole minute, joined up writing. You're not allowed to, must be joined up. You're not allowed to finish your whole first name. You must go as slow, so make sure it takes a whole minute. And when you do that, you're really shocked what your writing looks like. I dare you to try that someday. And that is when your behavior is accurate. Everybody can read your name, but it's not fluent. It's far too slow. Yeah, I've already mentioned this, we got a bit carried away here for this slide. Behavioral fluency training develop accuracy and speed, and it's one of the hallmarks of ABA in most contemporary programs for the past 20 years or more. The other key aspect of applied behavior analysis is prompt fading, behavioral momentum, maintenance of behavior gains, and generalization. I've mentioned that already. So ABA is a broad field that has pioneered many different kinds of procedures that lead to meaningful and socially important behavior change. Then people are saying ABA follows a medical model that only deals with the behavior, not the whole child. Well, that's actually completely not true. ABA is based on the social model. The social model talks about how the environment impacts on the individual. That is exactly what behavior analysis is all about. Our focus is on arranging the environment, like in the minutiae sometimes, and not sometimes in the larger scale, micro, macro, whatever, antecedent intervention, prompting, task analysis, video modeling, anything to do about arranging the environment. And then the work is about establishing environmental contingencies, mostly in naturalistic environment training, but sometimes also in discrete trials, and sometimes in social and life skills training. So, and of course, really important is to consider the respective social and cultural contexts in which these things happen. So we use a very broad holistic definition of behavior in behavior analysis. We say behavior is the interaction of the person with their environment. So you have the organism, the biological person and their environment, and behavior happens in that intersection. The focus of behavior analysis is on the whole child. In fact, we avoid the dichotomy between body and mind. So we avoid the pitfalls of mentalism, but that's a whole other discussion. ABA is too expensive. That's one maybe you've heard before. We know that in terms of effectiveness, 20 to 40% of the children with autism who receive ABA-based interventions, good quality, intensive intervention, achieve optimal outcomes. And as optimal outcomes, the definition is that they are able to do what other kids can do. That not that they're the same as other kids, because no one child is the same. I've got 4 kids and none of them is the same as the other. None of them has autism, but none of them is the same as the other one. And they're not normal because there is no normal in terms of kids. But the optimal outcome for a child with autism who is maybe non-verbal, who is maybe showing no interest in anything other than twisting and turning and lining up and whatever else, no social contact, the optimal outcome for those kids is to be in amongst the rest of the gang and without an adult trailing after them, helping them along, being able to do it on their own. And of course, every child has their little idiosyncrasies, and nobody wants to take that away from anybody. Now, when you do that, that potentially saves 65% of the cost of supporting adult services. And there's loads and loads of cost-benefit analysis I can send you if you're interested. Just a couple of ones. One of the things that I've done a lot of work is around poverty for these families. And one of the reasons why these families often end up in financial dire straits is that one parent gives up work. You know, both parents were starting, you know, when they started getting together, they both worked. They had a 2-income family, but then they had a child with autism. And usually mum, but sometimes also dad, actually, interestingly, quite a few dads give up work and to look after the child. That means they're now in one income family, and having a child with disabilities, everybody knows that is more expensive than having a child without disabilities or without severe disabilities anyway. Because simply, like for instance, if you want to go to somewhere with your child and your child cannot be on a bus, you have to take a taxi, more expensive. Small things like that all add up. And then of course there's the big expenses as well. So in Ontario, in Canada, they had an estimated saving of $35 million per year, and that has led to statewide ABA-based services for individuals with autism. And in the Netherlands, same sort of figures. I'm not going to go through them, but ultimately, the cost of ABA-based services are linked to staff costs, okay, because you spend a lot of time with the kids doing very systematically, very specific things, and the staff need paid, right? The science itself is free. The science is like biology. Biology doesn't cost anything. But if you want a doctor, that person needs a wage. So if you want ABA interventions that need to be delivered by somebody, that person needs a wage. So there's nothing abnormal about the cost. But the interesting thing is, and I think this is where it should go, is children who need support are usually allocated a full-time or part-time staff member, like a teaching assistant. So if these teaching assistants were all trained and supervised to deliver ABA-based programs, there wouldn't be any additional cost. They're already in employment. They're already there. So that would be one way of dealing with that. Another one, behavior analysts are biased towards ABA. That's a really interesting one, because people are trying to undermine our written work, our research, saying, oh yeah, but you're a behavior analyst, so you will find that ABA is good because you're, but they don't say that to biologists. A biologist, is a biologist biased towards the discipline of biology when they present facts about biology? That's just a really silly argument. The research that is, the data that we collect are usually we have inter-observer reliability tests to make sure that the data that we present are the data that the outcomes of the experimental work, of the studies and of the research that we do, and also we don't publication bias, where you don't report when something didn't work. We tend to not do that. We tend to publish whenever something didn't work, but it doesn't. Usually that's not the end of it for us as behavior analysts. When something didn't work, we carry on until we find a way to make it work. That's the difference between, we're not just going in and sort of saying, okay, pre and post test, and post test shows it didn't work. That's nowhere at the end for behavior analysts. That's a starting point for behavior analysts, because we then go back and say, why did it not work, and what do we need to do to make it work? So in the end of the day, our data usually has outcome. The outcomes are usually meeting the targets that we had set, but that's because we don't give up until we do. It's an inductive way of working. It's quite different from a deductive research process. So the teaching not only can but must be guided by the science if the students with disability are to learn as much as they're able to learn. Scientific research can help us discriminate between effective and reliable practices and those that are false and merely fashionable. And this is Bill Heward, and actually he's been to Belfast, he's given conference presentations to us. He is one of the big names in the field, and he's saying the popularity of a particular curriculum or method does not necessarily correlate with its effectiveness, and that's where we sometimes bang our head against the wall. And then we have people who are just saying, I'm against ABA. We don't need ABA, we're already doing everything the child needs. ABA is no different from quality teaching. ABA is not the only thing that works. I've been instructed not to do ABA, and that's really interesting. And the approach or program used in our school is all that's necessary for the child's education. Well, the first question you should ask somebody who says that to you is, what do you mean by ABA? And a closer look at some of the widely used alternatives. At best, these are aspirational without much detail on how to achieve the aims, and at worst, an eclectic pick and mix or commercial off-the-shelf, one-fits-all approach that sometimes claims to use elements from ABA without specifying what is meant by this. So I've written on eclectic approaches and so forth, so you're welcome to have a look at more into detail of that. But generally speaking, when there's comparison studies between ABA-based intervention methods, especially in the field of autism, but also in other fields, ABA-based interventions come up tops because they're scientifically validated, and we don't give up until we actually achieve what needs to be achieved. And then the question is, what did it take to get there? That's our research question. What does it take to get the behavior from A to B, basically? We have a couple of points. People are talking about traditional versus contemporary ABA. I get very intrigued by that, because which scientist would deliberately ignore advances and new discoveries in their science in order to practice outdated traditional fashion? I mean, that's just not what people do. You stay ahead of your science. You learn the new things. I mean, you update. I mean, we all do that. So I mean, it's like somebody saying to, in your own field, are you practicing traditional or contemporary? I mean, you'd go through the history, you talk to the students about the history of your science, that's fine. But then you also talk to them why we don't do certain things anymore, because we have now further evidence and further science to show us new things. So I think it's actually interesting that the that in the USA now at the moment, all states, all 52 states in the USA have laws. They have an insurance system for health insurance, as you know, and the funding for anything like ABA-based intervention has to go through health. And they have now, in each state has now a law to say that insurances are to fund ABA-based interventions. So that means 52 times in America, they have looked at all the evidence and decided that this is the way to go. And they will, and there are now ABA-based interventions for kids with autism and for adults with autism as well, and most of them are considered gold standard. And it's actually interesting because now we're looking at some of the research coming through from America, and they're talking about treatment as usual, and compare that, you know, with the comparison groups and stuff, and we know that treatment as usual is actually pretty good ABA-based intervention, and then they add something else into the program, or they add a new procedure that's come to light to the program, and sort of say, well, does this new procedure actually help with treatment as usual? Well, that's really interesting, because treatment as usual here in the UK would be eclectic. It wouldn't be ABA-based. So we need to make sure that the treatment as usual is also very well defined. So in terms of the ethical obligation to dispel misinformation, given the lack of training of ABA that I have alluded to at the beginning of this talk, education and health professionals rely on government policies to gain information. That's what they do. However, there are misconceptions about ABA that are perpetuated because well-trained behaviour analysts have been excluded from report writing teams and government bodies. And there's a paper that we published about a year ago, it's called Fake News in the Autism Policies, where we give lots of examples where I've knocked on doors to try and get on committees and get onto these bodies that are developing in Northern Ireland, developing autism policies. They have excluded, not only me personally, they have actually excluded both universities that are have knowledge and expertise in the field. The autism strategy that we're working on at the moment from 2013 to 2020 did not have anything. I think the universities was mentioned once in relation. Ulster was mentioned once in relation to widening participation, to having students with autism in the colleges, which is of course great, but all our research, all of our teaching, none of it was part of the autism strategy. So we are totally excluded. And I have written, I'm at the moment, I'm writing the same email every fortnight to see if I get a response, because I won't get a response. So that'll be quite interesting. But anyway, that's we need to misspell misinformation, because this has an impact on decision making, and particularly in the area of autism. But we could be doing so much more if we just didn't have to worry about this area so much more anymore. So who would you believe? Those who are not trained in ABA, who are speaking outside their area of expertise, and that's why I mentioned that earlier, who make controversial, confusing, and at times rather perplexing statements about ABA that I've talked about? Or would you believe board-certified behaviour analysts who've spent many years of training at master's or doctoral level? So please, people out there, and here's some more detail on the American. Why have the American in 50 states the insurance companies agreed? Because this is not an easy battle to win. Okay, so that's me. There's references. I'm going to leave this up for a minute for anybody who wants to pause the video, and there's some more references for anybody who wants to pause the video. So that's me so far. I think I've probably overrun the time a wee bit, but hopefully not too much. Hopefully you're still with me.